Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the Chaos Dwarves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and their awesome mechanics that hopefully Creative Assembly will be using to a degree or another in future games, especially if we're looking at medieval free Total War. 40k, I think that's going to be a bit of a different discussion considering how that universe works, because you have long established empires in 4K, so building an economy from scratch just kind of doesn't make sense. That's probably a bigger discussion in Total War, how building from scratch an empire may not necessarily be the thing that we want in future Total War games. I mean, we certainly have had periods where Creative Assembly experimented with us starting with established empires, but it generally wasn't necessarily well developed. Okay, so speaking about the Chaos Dwarves, one of their unique aspects, of course, is their resource system. So raw material, armaments, influence, laborers, which, yeah, basically slaves. I guess they want to avoid using that term, and that's the reason they haven't, which is interesting that they did use it for Dark Elves back in Warhammer 2. But regardless of that, they do have this unique economic system, which is based on the economic system of Troy. And I think whatever one might feel about Total War Troy, or a Total War Saga Troy, that system was phenomenal in that game. I would say that Creative Assembly did a great job taking that system and implementing it in Warhammer 3. I think they could have gone further. Things like, if you look at the dwarves, if you look at some other races, they could have done so as well. Of course, Chaos Dwarves are a very, very powerful race, considering their unit roster. They have pretty decent infantry or pretty decent massed units with things like hobgoblins, sneaky gits, cutthroats, archers, and then elite units with Chaos Dwarf warriors, infernal guard, and a whole bunch of artillery. Hell, even the hobgoblin bolt throwers aren't too terrible, all things considered. I mean, the thing about bolt throwers, when you think about it, the issue for dwarves with bolt throwers is the fact that they have better artillery options even at the same tier, so what's the point? But for other races that may not have those options, like looking at greenskins, or when they have limited artillery options, if we look at Chaos Dwarves, those are useful. Of course, Chaos Dwarves are not necessarily perfect. This is really a case of where Creative Assembly build a race on certain ideas and then didn't consider the pacing issues. Specifically, Chaos Dwarves were built for Realms of Chaos campaigns, like a certain number of turns that we would play, we would fight. That was the model. And that is one of the limiting factors for them as a race. Because the way the race works is you start off with very limited unit capacity, very limited resources, and yes, you do eventually get a ton of them, no problem whatsoever, but by the time you get those resources, you end up just decimating anyone and everything that stands in your path. And in some ways, this obviously did apply back in Troy as well. Like, one of the things to be said about the resource system in Troy is that it worked if the campaign was set up in such a way that you had those resources, gold especially. But if your starting position was more limited, it didn't necessarily work. This was a specific issue for the Chians as opposed to, say, for instance, Aeneas, who started with all the critical resources that he needed. And in that game, at least, you could trade for resources with other factions, which unfortunately you can't do when you're playing Chaos Dwarves. Yes, you have convoys, and those convoys do give you certain resources, but one, they take multiple turns, and the resource gained are not necessarily going to be sufficient for the kind of needs you have. And by the time you do start being able to get more and more resources, like, say, for instance, sending a longer caravan for armaments, in particular for a lot of laborers, or, sending one for tons of laborers right there. By the time that's done, you kind of don't care anymore because you are so far ahead. I mean, yeah, that would be a good trade there in Car, but all the same, just one of those dynamics of pacing. Armaments are gained by building factories and then converting raw materials into those armaments. Influence is gained through certain buildings and really primarily through sacrifice to Zarna Grund, 200 laborers for influence per province. That's how it works. And materials are gained, generally speaking, from strip mines, right? So you build a mine, you build an outpost, you mine the resources, you get those raw materials, and that's how your economy works, in theory, right? But this is where things get a bit busted when we consider Chaos Dwarves, because one of the things you can do when you're playing them, if you don't want to spend dozens of turns building up your empire to the same degree as other factions, is you can just go to a settlement and raise it to the ground. Now, for minor settlements, of course, you would have to rebuild said settlement, which, yes, that is a drawback. But considering the fact that you do need those raw materials, it is a net gain. So, for instance, over here, if I were to gain a lot of raw materials or fight a lot of battles, then yes, I would just be able to get to tier 4, even tier 5 capital. Now, here's the ridiculous part. So say, for instance, I raise this settlement, right? And hopefully Astrogoth will have, yes, he does. Well, you can only take settlements as either outposts, factories, or towers. But towers only are gained at tier 1 unless you're spending influence for them. So essentially, unless you spend influence, you're going to get level 1 towers, provincial capitals. You can make provincial capitals into outposts or factories if you so desire. You can always look to convert things later. But the ridiculous part here is when you raise a settlement, right, it should be taken as a ruin. Well, the way towers work is you get the building instantly. And yes, that does have with it a bunch of nonsense, especially when you consider that you can take an entire province as ruins, and because you can take the provincial capital intact at tier 1, you can then instantly construct a barracks over there and sell it to a different faction for tons of money. So why wouldn't you raise settlements in a campaign as Chaos Dwarves? You're not going to have the resources to really rebuild them, and in terms of materials, and if it's a question of gold, that ain't a damn problem. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that Chaos Dwarves incentivize you as a player to either take it very fucking slow and very boring as a result of that, or they push you towards abusing these kind of mechanics in a campaign. So that would be one of the downsides of it. Like, that's the problem when Creative Assembly has this mentality. It's like, oh, have the player build slow, but become also really powerful. Something to be mentioned on this subject is the way Chaos Dwarves do work once you build them up, because they are fucking ridiculous, and I'm not joking on that. I mean, when you think of Chaos Dwarves, think of the fact that Hobgoblins and Hobgoblin Archers are capable of defeating or holding their own against many early game foes, and even though you have limited unit capacity early on, you can and should use your faction, your capability of instant construction in order to get access to higher tier settlements. Building an economy is all well and good, but really, you just kind of don't care about it, essentially. When you can just raise settlements, the higher the settlement tier, the better off you are, and if it's a question of money, then you can just region trade. So basically, the idea is to have this faction that builds up their economy and builds up their armaments, etc. But what you start realizing very, very damn quickly when you're playing Chaos Dwarves is you kind of don't care about a lot of that. Sure, you will want at least one mine, absolutely, and you will be doing region trading, but all the same. And it's not like Chaos Dwarves have an easy time where it's like, oh, we can just take our time. No. Chaos Dwarves have to deal with Grimgor. In this case, I have defeated him. But basically, Grimgor is the kind of legendary lord that if you ignore, he's going to show up with multiple stacks of endgame troops at your doorstep with a lot of heroes and just beat the crap out of you. Grimgor is just scary. He's scary on the campaign map. He's scary in battle. Like, he is genuinely one of the very few campaign and battle threats that you will ever encounter in this game. Because on one hand, he can build tons of armies that are really powerful themselves, and okay, most of the time when that kind of happens, at least you have the idea, okay, I'll just beat them in battle. But then you fight Grimgor in battle, and well, let's just say I fear few things, but I do fear Grimgor. One, he has WAS, so he'll generally have 40 troops that he'll throw against you. Maybe not the best quality, but all the same, lots of troops. You might get lucky with the faction potential and Tamarkan or Kolek beats him up. But that's a very, very tricky situation because you're relying on one, Tamarkan not ending up in a war with Archeon, Tamarkan actually beating Kolek, which again you have to have a higher faction potential for Tamarkan versus Kolek for that to work out. And then you're also relying on the idea that Grimgor has a lower faction potential than either Kolek or Tamarkan. So there's a lot of ifs. And even if you do defeat Grimgor, which is a big question mark, of course, even if you defeat him easily enough, of course, or you don't have to fight him, then congrats. You likely have Greasus also becoming a problem, or the Dwarves. A lot of people hate the Chaos Dwarves, and this is kind of the thing. Like, you've got Astrogoth and Drazov, both of which are surrounded on one hand by the dwarves to the west, so Ungrim, Thorgrim, even Skarsnik if we're talking about greenskins, but then you have Grimgor to the east. It is a hell of a Thunderdome. I think it's a fun dynamic in a campaign from the perspective of a war, but that's kind of where we get into another problem. Because what I've said about Chaos Dwarves building up to be extremely damn powerful is, well, if you survive Grimgor, GG well played, you've won your campaign. Like, essentially, when you're playing any Chaos Dwarf campaign, even Zaytan, the question you gotta ask, can I survive and beat Grimgor? Or can he be beaten by other AI factions? If the answer is yes, congrats, you've won your campaign and no one will be able to stop you. The reason is that while Chaos Dwarves may start slow, they do start having a lot of ridiculous benefits, even from their basic research tree. Like, let's consider this idea, for instance. Military-wise, you can get things like upkeep, various benefits, upkeep reduction, casualty replenishment, hero capacity for Infernal Castellans. It is 500 armaments, but it is power. But then we look at sorcery, and even for things that don't require you to spend any special resource, you get Lord and Hero Recruit rank, hero capacity for Demonsmen Sorcerers, hero capacity for Bold Centaur, Tarax, Tallest Towers, and then Industry, maximum convoy capacity experience per turn for convoy overseers, etc., etc., etc. Basically, the research tree alone gives them a significant benefit the longer that they play their campaign. And that's not to talk about the specific techs over here that do cost various resources that make things even more ridiculous. It is slower early on, like basic construction times are annoyingly long because the developers balanced around the idea that you would be using laborers. Funny how Dark Elves don't have to worry about that. They have regular construction times, and they can also use instant construction. That's why Dark Elves are amazing as a race. But then, beyond that, you also have this unit capacity situation. So Chaos Dwarf units, by default, are very strong, but they are limited capacity, only one each. I think it should be higher, right? In this case, I have 2 war machines, but, 2 warriors, 2 war machines, 2 blunderbusses. That's it. That's your basic stuff. Everything else is 1. Well, the thing is, once you overcome that initial deficit and you start pumping out just pure armies, like you could just spend all of your armaments on Chaos Dwarf warriors, and surprisingly, you do very fucking well with that. Let alone a combination of artillery, Chaos Dwarf, blunderbusses, and warriors. That is a level of power. Combine that with the research, the hero capacity, and especially when you consider Astrogoth, who gets a Lord Skill line that increases hero and Lord Recruit rank +3, and increases hero capacity +2. I mean, I do believe Drazif is much better in terms of a longer campaign, but in terms of a short campaign, Astrogov just dominates the crap out of everyone just because he has more heroes than everyone. The annoyance is more so actually being able to recruit those heroes in the first place because you need those different buildings. So, yeah, I did start with the building that allowed me to recruit Bull Center Tarak, then I sold it, different things. But once you get the hero stack going, you will not lose easily. And that's, again, only part of it, because then you consider the manufactory, which gives your different Chaos Dwarf units even more power. So think of this. You spend a long campaign spending resources fighting battles, and the reward is, here's more power! A lot more power. You turn individual units that are already pretty good into machines of death and destruction, and then it gets even crazier with Chaos Dwarves, because this is why they're freaking crazy. You look at the Tower of Tsar research tree, or Tower of Tsar Conclave, which thankfully Creative Assembly did not use for high elves, though, yeah, they screwed up in that respect. But think of the basic stuff that you get here. I mean, just lower tier. You get casualty replenishment, you get replenished campaign movement range after winning a battle, you get random items, wins of magic, armaments per turn, and then things like Armor of Contempt, ability uses, armor, melee defense, immune to psychology. And this is just the lowest level tier, but once an entire district is completed, well, for instance, causing wall breaches is very good. But then you start looking into the insane shit that you start getting here at tier 2. Because, once tier 1 is completed, that's when the fun begins. Things like Demagog, that gives you a powerful AoE ability. Basically, that's a Cataclysm spell. Yeah. That is simply for all lords. Then you get another one for lords. That's and Dreadquake Battery. And sure, there's some other benefits. But basically what I'm trying to say here is that the more you go up the Tower of Tsar, the more ridiculous you start getting. More and more and more ridiculous. And really, what you kind of care about in the Tower of Tsar is confederation with other Legendary Lords. And once you confederate any Legendary Lord, or you get Tsar Nagrund, it's like GG well played, nothing can stop you. Compound that with the fact that you have every climate in the game available. I think the ideas of Chaos Dwarves were amazing, but they messed up the pacing, largely because of fucking Realms of Chaos. Again, they designed this race for Realms of Chaos, and it shows, and I think they need an update to work better in Immortal Empires. Better starting resources, less bullshit that we gain later on in a campaign. Or foes to actually use that stuff against, because that's kind of the problem. When you gain that level of power, it's just playing the enter and button simulator with very little to do. You can conquer the world, like very few other people can eventually. Seriously, an army of hobgoblins with all those army abilities can defeat endgame armies. And I'm not necessarily exaggerating on that. Because the problem with endgame armies is you might have, say, a full siege tank stack to deal with, but unless there's a good lord leading that army, if you have a max level lord or a group of max level heroes in that army supporting your forces, then you can even use laborers to win. What combination of army abilities, heroes, and the lord power. That's the thing. Every individual lord, hero, and Chaos Dwarf unit is extremely powerful. And combined with the shit you get from research through the Tower of Tsar, through the Hellforge, it just ends up being ridiculous. I think Creative Assembly should have understood that adding these multipliers, because essentially that's what they are, was going to break things. They tried to balance it out in their heads by the idea that we would just have few resources, until we realized we don't have limited resources. It's kind of stupid when you think about it, but literally one of the craziest things you can do as Chaos Dwarves is literally conquer Zarnagrund yourself. Hell, even raise it to the ground if you fucking want to, because that's a ridiculous thing. Or raise the other settlements. Get tons of materials that you can then use to rebuild it from scratch. It's actually better than, influence. Or you can just build up a lot of influence and materials and just take it. by abusing things. I think that's where things start kind of falling apart. Amazing race, superb design ideas, but again, the specifics of balancing and pacing is generally what holds it back. Christine signing out, stay tuned for more.